Chapter 20. Ladies. Mac's hard voice cut through their peaceful tea time, only to be drowned out by Muggs's sudden barking as he woke up from his nap. Goliath had accompanied Mac on this walk and ignored the dog and jumped into Nan's lap. Doreen looked at Mac in surprise, but he ignored her to study Nan's face. Doreen hurriedly stood and pulled up a spare chair. In a bright voice she said, "Join us." He sat down in the very small chair, making her wince. He glanced at her even as he scratched Muggs's ear. In a droll voice he said, "I'm sure it will hold my weight." She flushed immediately. "Sorry," she muttered. "Oh, what are you sorry for? Coming here to see Nan before I have a chance to question her? Why shouldn't I be allowed to talk to her? It's not like this has anything to do with a current murder at my place, and it's not like Nan is a murder suspect," Doreen said dismissively. She picked up her tea and took a sip. "Or is she?" He glared at her. "Every time I turn around in this case, I am tripping over you. If it isn't at Lifelong Insurance, then it's here at Nan's." Doreen straightened in outrage. "Well, I'm sure your investigative work entailed more than those two places. And obviously, I have to check into anything that might involve Nan. And I did show you the things I found in Nan's house." "Dear, it's okay." Nan reached over and patted her wrist. "Don't worry about it. Mac's just a little upset that you got here before him." "A little upset?" She glared at Nan. Muggs, sitting underneath the table, stood up on his back legs, his paws on her knee, and growled at her tone. She patted his forehead. "It's all right, Muggs. I'm fine." "Is he a good guard dog?" Mac asked, a frown on his face as he studied the basset. "They were originally bred for hunting, I believe." "I have no idea. The guard dog occasion hasn't arisen yet," she said. "He only just realized he could bark. My almost ex-husband frowned on Muggs making noise, so a dog trainer trained him not to bark. But now that it's just us, he's found his voice again." She stroked his long silky ears and smiled at the bag-eyed dog. "Of course Goliath helps in that area too." "Goliath can take care of himself, that's for sure," Nan said cheerfully. She looked at the teapot and poured another round of tea for all three of them. "Now Thaddeus, he's a different story." "And why did you not tell me more about Goliath and Thaddeus, Nan?" Doreen asked. "It's one thing to leave me an independent monster-sized cat, happy to be inside and outside, but to leave me Thaddeus." Nan's laughter trailed across the garden, making both Mac and Doreen smile. "Like we were just saying, Thaddeus is a gem." On cue, Thaddeus jumped up and landed on Nan's shoulder. In his soft crooning voice he said, "Thaddeus is here. Thaddeus is here." And in a moment of naked affection, the cat and the bird nestled in closer to Nan. Doreen stared at the two pets, then shook her head. "How is it you could leave them?" "I had little choice. Besides, Thaddeus is fickle, my dear. Right now he looks like he is my long-lost friend, and in truth he is. But he could also be your long-lost friend in 5 minutes. And I can't have pets here. Thaddeus will outlive me, possibly all of us, so I had to make provisions for him anyway." Doreen leaned forward. "But you didn't make provisions for him, Nan. You just left him and Goliath behind." "Nonsense. You were arriving on a specific day. He and Goliath were fine until then, as I went back and forth to feed them. And if I had told you about them, you would have fretted over your delay." Doreen sat back at that. Just because Nan was correct, it didn't mean Doreen felt like hearing it. Neither did she like to see the quirk of Mac's lips as he held back his smile. She glared at him. "Didn't you have a reason for coming here?" He put down his teacup and proceeded to ask Nan the exact same questions that Doreen had. Nan laughed. You really should hire Doreen as your assistant. You know that, don't you? She already asked me those same things. Still, Nan went over the answers she'd given Doreen earlier. Doreen was fascinated with the case. Quite a twist had been found here, and somehow Nan was involved. Doreen didn't think Nan had anything to do with either murder, so there had to be somebody else. There was really no other explanation. Mac turned his attention to Doreen. I had the powder analyzed. It was simple cornstarch. I suspect it was in the envelope to keep the photos from sticking together. Well, that mystery at least is solved. I'm glad it wasn't poison, she exclaimed. With a bright smile, she finished the last of her tea and stood. She gave Nan a hug and kiss and said, I'll stop by in another day or two. With Muggs at her side, Goliath at her feet, and Thaddeus now transferred to her shoulder, she turned to Mac. I'm sure I'll see you again, Mr. Moreau. In a gruff voice he said, I told you to call me Mac. She smiled. So you did. Have a good day, Mac, Nan. She walked away, hearing the two of them talking, and heard her name mentioned. Hopefully only good things were discussed, because Doreen had been a laughingstock for a lot of people over the last few years. But she trusted Nan. She was the only other person in the world who cared what happened to Doreen, other than herself. Her mind was consumed with the pictures of the dead man as she walked back to her house slowly. A library was just around the corner, probably the only way to get the archives on the newspaper articles from 30 years ago, but she would have to leave Muggs, Goliath, and Thaddeus at home. She had the one article in mind, but that didn't mean other papers would have carried the same story. What she really needed was more history on the death of the first man to die. And for that she should have asked Mac. She pulled out her phone, hit his contact number and smiled, loving that he'd stayed to visit with Nan after grilling her. When he answered, she asked without preamble, Did you get any information on the man in the pictures? I haven't gone to the office yet. I'll do that then. She nodded and smiled at a neighbor, who gave her an odd look and hurried by. As Doreen approached her driveway, she spoke into her phone again. Let me know what you find, please. It's a police matter, he said in exasperation. I'm not checking in with you at every step. But it's probably better if you do, she said. Otherwise, I'll have to get that information myself. And you don't like me doing that. She hung up, cutting him off mid-sputter, and pocketed her phone with a chuckle. Back at the house, the animals following her, she returned to the spare bedroom for another look around, seeing if she had possibly missed anything. She hadn't even begun to search the walls. Was that an odd thing to consider? The walls were covered in wallpaper, but paneling appeared to be underneath, as seen where the wallpaper had been torn. But how could she tell if something was hidden behind the actual walls? She guessed she wouldn't unless she tore off all the paneling to find the studs beneath. She didn't feel the need to do that. However, feeling foolish but unable to stop herself, she rapped on the nearest wall and continued around the room. It all sounded the same until she got to the closet. She studied the closet, stepped inside and looked around. In the ceiling was a trapdoor leading to the attic. It appeared to be added to the house as an afterthought. Just a small 3-foot square opening. From her first look, the cover was just propped there, to be pushed aside once she could reach that high. It wasn't a full-fledged attic access with a pull-down door that had a fold-up ladder affixed to it. She stepped back out and stared around the room, walking out into the hallway and looking up. Every house had an attic, but wasn't the attic door usually located somewhere in the middle of the house? Where the roof pitch was the highest. That way, someone could stand up inside the attic. Also, tradesmen would have access to wiring, piping, ductwork and whatnot strung throughout the attic, amid all the stuff people stored up there too. Back in the spare bedroom, she eyed the night table, but didn't think it would be tall enough for her purposes. Neither was a kitchen chair. Back downstairs, she found a big lantern flashlight. That would help. She clicked it on and off several times to make sure the battery worked. Then she located a small step stool. Its top riser was higher than the kitchen chair seat. She dragged the light and the stool upstairs into the spare bedroom's closet. With the flashlight in hand, she slowly climbed up the step stool, setting aside the cover to the attic access. With her head and shoulders now popped through into the attic, she turned on the lantern light and slowly searched the space. Initially, it looked empty, until she circled completely around and found several boxes. Easily 6 to 8 boxes were stacked between where she was and the outside wall. Once again, the hunt for treasure overtook her. Small sheets of plywood lay between the rafters to stop people from falling through as they got up here, but they would be a bit of a challenge to navigate. She would have to change clothes before she attempted that. She walked into her bedroom, quickly put on a pair of her capri-length jeans, some tennis shoes, and an old t-shirt, courtesy of Nan's closet. Doreen suspected the attic would be full of spider webs. She moved the stepladder closer to the edge of the attic opening and slowly climbed up. Using her arms, she pulled herself into the attic, sitting at the opening, her legs dangling below, and looked around. The attic was empty, except for the stack of boxes she had spied earlier. She suspected the contents would be stupid things, like broken Christmas ornaments. Carefully, she crawled on the plywood sheets closer to the boxes. 2 were stacked in front of her. She grabbed the bottom one and slowly tugged them both toward her. Surprisingly heavy, she kept pulling. She needed to know what was in all these boxes. Shaking them first to check for breakables inside, but hearing nothing like that, she then dropped the first 2 boxes into the closet next to the step stool. Joining the boxes on the closet floor, she inspected them in the light of the closet, finding no list of contents or other identification marked on any side of either box. She grabbed the corner of the tape sealing the top of the first box and pulled it off. The animals were curious too, as Muggs had joined her in the closet and milled around her feet, with Goliath on the bed glaring and an unusually quiet Thaddeus perched on the dresser. She pulled out what appeared to be men's clothing. A charcoal gray suit. She shook her head. Oh Nan. Where the devil did these come from? Doreen searched the pockets of the jacket and pulled out a $20 bill, almost proof that this was Nan's work, packing up these clothes in this box. But Nan never would have worn these clothes, so who the heck did they belong to? Inside the breast pocket, Doreen pulled out a business card. The name matched the name in the newspaper article. Jeremy Feldspar. She glanced over at Thaddeus. What's the matter, Thaddeus? Don't have anything to say now. Normally at moments like this, he had some catchy phrase of doom and gloom. But even now, Thaddeus just stared at her and the clothes and remained silent. Somehow she found that even worse.